For 12 days in June, Israeli bombs rained down on Iran. As part of Operation Rising Lion, Israel's Air Force haunted Tehran's top leadership, destroyed military bases, weapons plants, research centers, and key pieces of civilian infrastructure, while Prime Minister Netanyahu called on Iranians to rise up against the rule of the Ayatollahs. The outcome of the 12-day war was catastrophic for Iran. The Islamic Republic not only suffered a military defeat, far more importantly, its grand strategy, carefully built since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, collapsed completely. For over 4 decades, Iran's security doctrine rested on two pillars: asymmetric deterrence through its network of regional proxies, known as the axis of resistance, and the myth of inviolability at home, the idea of Iran as a fortress, protected by strategic depth, ballistic missiles, and a nuclear insurance policy built on the ambiguity of its atomic program. The 12-day war shattered both. It exposed the axis of resistance, systematically weakened between 2023 and 2025, as little more than a paper tiger, and revealed that the Islamic Republic, infiltrated by Israeli intelligence, was no fortress at all. The 12-day war was more than just another episode in the long-running shadow conflict between Iran and Israel. It was, above all, a collision between Iran's illusions and brutal reality. 4 decades of strategic effort crumbled to dust, leaving the Islamic Republic facing its gravest existential crisis since 1980, when Saddam Hussein's armored divisions rolled into Khuzestan. Once again, Iran's very survival is in doubt, especially since Prime Minister Netanyahu is unlikely to give his archenemy much time to regroup. And so Tehran is now desperately searching for a new path to survival, a new security doctrine to safeguard the Islamic Republic. All options are on the table, including the ultimate one, openly pursuing a nuclear weapon. A race against time has begun, one that will determine Iran's fate. To grasp the scale of Iran's current crisis, we need to step back in time. The grand strategy of the Islamic Republic is rooted in two formative events: the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the traumatic 8-year war with Iraq from 1980 to 1988. The revolution brought about a Copernican shift in Iranian politics, redefining Tehran's enemies and goals. The pro-Western course was abandoned, and the United States, once a key ally, was recast as the quote, Great Satan. Quiet cooperation with Israel gave way to a doctrine of uncompromising hostility toward the quote, Little Satan. Yet the far greater influence on Iran's strategic thinking came from the devastating war with Iraq. Although Saddam's aggression was ultimately repelled and the war became a founding myth of the Islamic Republic, it was also a searing trauma for the young revolution. 500,000 dead, cities reduced to rubble, and the horror of Iraqi chemical attacks left a deep imprint on an entire generation of Iranian strategists. They draw one overriding conclusion, one that would redefine Iran's security doctrine for the next 4 decades. Under no circumstances could Iran allow another war to be fought on its own soil. The next conflict, they reasoned, might be too costly and the Islamic Republic too fragile to survive. Future battlefields had to be pushed as far from Iran's borders as possible. But how? Iran's strategists understood the country was too weak to build a conventional buffer zone. Instead, they turned to asymmetric methods of warfare and a network of irregular militias, implementing the doctrine of forward defense in a novel way. This was the birth of the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance has often been compared to an octopus, its head in Tehran, its tentacles spread across the region, forming an asymmetric shield. For decades, it seemed like a brilliant solution to Iran's security dilemmas. At its peak, this geopolitical octopus consisted of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Assad's Syria, Shiite militias in Iraq, the Houthi movement in Yemen, and operating in Gaza, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The axis of resistance was often portrayed as an ideological or religious project aimed at exporting the Islamic Revolution beyond Iran's borders. That view, however, oversimplifies the reality. It was, above all, a military project designed to create a buffer that would tie down Iran's enemies far from its territory, absorbing the risks and costs of direct confrontation. Seen in this light as a military product, it becomes clearer how Iran managed to unite under a single banner groups with starkly different ideologies, from Shiite Hezbollah to Sunni Hamas to the secular Alawite Bashar al-Assad. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, played a central role in running the Axis. Its officers, most famously General Qasem Soleimani, coordinated operations, provided weapons and money. At the same time, Tehran never sought total control over its partners, which gave Iran a priceless advantage: plausible deniability and the ability to distance itself from the actions of its proxies. As an external buffer, the axis of resistance formed only the first and most forward layer of Iran's security architecture. Two more layers were designed to guarantee Iran's own inviolability. The second layer was its advanced ballistic missile program. Drawing on Russian, Chinese and North Korean expertise, Iran built one of the largest arsenals in the region, estimated at more than 3,000 missiles. The most dangerous, with ranges over 2,000 kilometers, could strike targets in Israel and southeastern Europe. The third and final layer was Iran's nuclear insurance policy, the deliberately ambiguous status of its nuclear program. Tehran has never officially declared an intent to build a bomb, but by edging toward nuclear weapons capability, enriching uranium beyond civilian levels, and allowing senior commanders to make suggestive statements, Iran created the impression that it was always just one step away. This strategic ambiguity was meant to be Tehran's ultimate guarantee of survival. For decades, this intricate system enabled Tehran to expand its influence across the region and deter stronger adversaries, creating an illusion of strength that the Ayatollahs themselves came to believe. That illusion was shattered brutally after October 7th, 2023. On that day, Hamas fighters attacked Israel, killing 1,200 people and taking another 251 hostage. Analysts still debate how deeply Iran was involved in planning the operation. Strategically, however, that question matters less than Tehran's next move. Soon after the assault, other arms of Iran's octopus joined the fight. Hezbollah opened fire from the north. The Houthis struck shipping in the Red Sea, and militias in Iraq and Syria attacked American bases. Prime Minister Netanyahu seized the moment, not only as a pretext for invading Gaza, but as an opportunity to wage a decisive campaign against Iran's entire regional project. He laid out his maximalist vision just days after the Hamas attack, declaring, quote, "What Hamas will go through will be difficult and terrible. We are in the midst of a campaign and we have only just begun. I ask you to stand firm, because we are going to change the entire Middle East." In the months that followed, Netanyahu carried out his promise with methodical precision, dismantling one by one the key pillars of the axis of resistance. By the summer of 2024, the Israeli army had crushed most of Hamas units and established operational control over Gaza. Netanyahu then turned to Hezbollah. In September 2024, thousands of pagers and radios used by Hezbollah fighters exploded simultaneously in Lebanon and Syria. This was followed by a wave of pinpoint airstrikes that eliminated the group's entire senior leadership, including Hassan Nasrallah. The final blow came with an Israeli ground offensive that drove Hezbollah out of the war for good. Then in December 2024, Netanyahu received an unexpected gift. Syrian rebels toppled President Assad in a matter of days. For Iran, it was a geopolitical disaster. Losing Assad meant not only the collapse of Tehran's influence in Syria, but also the severing of its land bridge to Hezbollah. Assad's fall was the final nail in the coffin of Iran's forward defense strategy. By the spring of 2025, the region's strategic landscape had been transformed beyond recognition. Hamas no longer existed as a viable fighting force. Hezbollah was shattered, and Syria, the key pillar of the Axis, was gone. The shield Tehran had spent 45 years constructing had collapsed, leaving the road to Iran wide open. Operation Rising Lion, the 12-day bombing campaign against Iran, was the natural culmination of a disastrous series of mistakes Tehran made after October 7, 2023. By activating the axis of resistance, Iran handed Israel the perfect pretext for war. At the same time, it proved utterly incapable of defending its allies, watching helplessly as they were destroyed. The Islamic Republic could not protect them even on its own soil, as shown by the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran in July 2024. Iran did launch 2 missile attacks on Israel in April and October 2024, but their limited scale and effectiveness only reinforced the conviction among Israeli strategists that the time had come for a decisive reckoning with the Islamic Republic. That conviction was vindicated in the Operation Rising Lion. For 12 days, Israeli aircraft operated freely in Iranian airspace. A network of agents spread panic, and Prime Minister Netanyahu called on Iranians to rise up and overthrow the rule of the Ayatollahs. Paradoxically, in this moment of chaos, the Islamic Republic was saved by its greatest enemy, Donald Trump. The American president did join the bombing campaign, but strictly on his own terms. Washington was not interested in Netanyahu's regime change plan. Instead, Trump ordered Operation Midnight Hammer, in which B-2 bombers struck only Iranian nuclear facilities. Trump's caution allowed the Ayatollahs to avoid total collapse. 2 days later, a humiliated Iran agreed to a ceasefire. The myth of the invulnerable fortress lay in ruins. Just as quickly as the 12-day war buried Iran's grand strategy, the country moved to reorganize its ranks. The defeat discredited above all the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, the main executor of the forward defense doctrine. In the opening hours of the operation, Israeli strikes eliminated most of the Corps' senior leadership, including its commander, General Hossein Salami. This opened the door to a debate over the IRGC's future role. While it is still too early for final judgments, the first move suggests Iran's leadership intends to curb the Corps' influence. For the first time in the Islamic Republic's history, the new chief of the general staff is not an IRGC officer, but a representative of the regular army, Artesh, General Abdolrahim Musavi. What's more, the Supreme Defense Council, an institution dating back to the Iran-Iraq War, has been reactivated. The official reason is the need for better coordination among Iran's various military formations. But the fact that the council is chaired by the president undermines the IRGC's position, as the Corps has until now answered directly to the supreme leader. Significant changes have also taken place within the Supreme National Security Council, the body that effectively serves as the forge of Iranian strategy, shaping the country's foreign and security policy. Its new secretary is Ali Larijani, long sidelined from politics. Though rooted in the conservative camp, Larijani is above all a pragmatist who once backed the nuclear deal with the West. His appointment signals that Tehran is seeking ways to de-escalate, to buy itself precious time, and to stave off the prospect of another confrontation. Despite the defeat, the mood among Iran's ruling elites is not uniformly grim. The civilian population's response came as a pleasant surprise. In the moment of trial, they did not heed Netanyahu's call to rise up, but instead rallied around one flag. The leadership knows, however, that this surge of patriotism is fragile. To sustain it, state propaganda has deliberately struck nationalist chords, drawing on Persia's millennia-old history while placing less emphasis on worn-out religious rhetoric. One newspaper linked to former President Hassan Rouhani captured the overall sentiment well. Quote, "We are neither defeated nor victorious. The enemy too neither won nor lost. The ceasefire is conditional. It depends on how quickly we can rebuild our capabilities." Unquote. Iran's problem is that rebuilding its old strategy is no longer possible. The country has stumbled into a strategic trap, with a drastically limited set of options. Restoring the axis of resistance in its former shape is a fantasy. Assad will not return to power in Syria, and the new government in Damascus is backed by Iran's regional rivals, Turkey and the Gulf states. More likely is a further erosion of Iranian influence. This is evident in Lebanon, where under US pressure, the government is preparing to disarm Hezbollah. Talk of such disarmament has circulated since the end of the Second Lebanon War in 2006. But never before has Hezbollah been this weakened, nor Beirut this determined. It is not unthinkable that within months, Hezbollah could be reduced to a purely political organization, with only the Houthis in Yemen and Shiite militias in Iraq left as functioning remnants of the old axis. Worsening Iran's predicament is its strategic lowliness. During the 12-day war, Russia and China, supposedly Tehran's close allies, stood by as Israeli and American bombs fell. Nor are Moscow and Beijing eager to bolster Iran's ahead of a second round of fighting, both guided by their own cold calculations. Iran's relationship with China illustrates this problem well. The much-hyped 25-year strategic cooperation agreement announced in 2021, supposedly worth $400 billion in investment, remains mostly on paper. In practice, Beijing has limited itself to importing Iranian oil at discounted prices, avoiding major investment for fear of US sanctions. Russia, itself under heavy sanctions, is somewhat more inclined to deepen ties. Yet with the bulk of its resources tied up in Ukraine, Moscow is in no position to make up for Iran's military losses. The search for new allies is virtually impossible. Decades of sponsoring armed militias have alienated most of the region's governments. Even the tactical normalization with Saudi Arabia stemmed from the fear of the axis of resistance strength, not from any genuine desire to build a lasting partnership. The tragedy of Iran's position is that its weakening has come at the worst possible moment. Hanging over Tehran like a sword of Damocles is not only the threat of another round of war with Israel, but a series of other looming dangers. The first of these dangers has already entered a decisive phase. On August 28th, the European powers, Britain, France and Germany, formally triggered the snapback mechanism enshrined in the 2015 nuclear deal. Their decision set in motion a 30-day process after which all UN sanctions on Iran will be automatically restrained. In economic terms, the immediate impact may be limited, given the crushing weight of existing US sanctions. Politically, however, the move is momentous. The return of UN sanctions will mark the definitive end of the JCPOA and bury any remaining hope of resolving the crisis diplomatically. The second threat, arguably even more serious, is the new dynamic in the Caucasus. As Iran was still licking its wounds from the 12-day war, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan signed a historic peace agreement in Washington, in the presence of President Trump. At its heart lies the creation of the Zangezur Corridor, branded by the Americans as the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. That deal grants the United States exclusive rights to develop this corridor for the next 99 years. For Tehran, this is a strategic nightmare. It means an American political and economic presence right on its northern border. along the key land route that connects Iran to Russia. All of Iran's conventional and asymmetric pillars of security have collapsed. The axis of resistance effectively no longer exists. The ballistic missile arsenal has proven inadequate as a deterrent, and Iranian territory has been deeply infiltrated by Israeli intelligence. Only one option remains on the table, one that could realistically restore deterrence: the pursuit of nuclear weapons. Although President Trump claimed after Operation Midnight Hammer that Iran's nuclear program had been completely destroyed, it is now clear that this was not the case. The facilities at Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan were badly damaged, but not eliminated. More troubling, the fate of roughly 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium remains unknown, reportedly moved by the Iranians to an undisclosed location just days before the US strikes. Adding to suspicions, immediately after the ceasefire, Tehran suspended cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency and expelled its inspectors, who until then had been monitoring Iran's nuclear program. All this raises serious doubts about Iran's intentions, yet the decision to actually build a bomb is far from straightforward. It is a perilous gamble. Given the depth of Israeli and American infiltration inside the country, conducting clandestine nuclear work is virtually impossible. Any attempt to militarize the program would almost certainly provoke a military response from both the United States and Israel. And so, for 45 years, the Persian lion, through cunning and asymmetric strength, moved with remarkable agility across the Middle Eastern chessboard. Today, wounded and isolated, the lion has been driven back into its mountain fortress. Its enemies, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu, seek to lock it in a cage, cut it off from the world, strip it of its claws, and condemn it to a slow death. Iran now faces a no-win scenario. Any attempt to rebuild the axis of resistance in its old form is an illusion. Yet abandoning the pursuit of nuclear weapons would leave Iran defenseless, an easy target for ever bolder Israeli strikes. Without a nuclear deterrent, Iran is doomed to bleed slowly under the blows of a stronger adversary it cannot match in a conventional battle. If, however, Tehran were to take the desperate step of building the bomb, it would hand its enemies the perfect pretext for a massive preemptive strike. The decision itself would become a self-fulfilling prophecy, triggering the very full-scale war Iran has spent 4 decades trying to avoid. This is the essence of its strategic stalemate, an absurd choice in which every move leads to defeat. There is, of course, a third path: diplomacy, but even this road seems like a dead end. Even if the Iranians wish to negotiate, across the table sits Donald Trump, transactional to the core, with no interest in subtle diplomatic games. The conditions he would impose would be intolerable for Tehran, not only the permanent dismantling of its nuclear program, but also the elimination of its ballistic arsenal and the remnants of the axis of resistance. For the Islamic Republic, whose identity for 45 years has been built on resistance to the Great Satan, accepting such terms would amount to political suicide. Thus, every escape route has been cut off. Passivity means slow death at Israel's hands. A nuclear gamble means near-certain destruction at the hands of the United States. Diplomacy means humiliating capitulation, undermining the very foundations of the Islamic Republic. Perhaps the only option left to the Persian lion is to endure, holding a defensive crouch, absorbing blow after blow, in the hope that regional dynamics eventually shift, that Netanyahu falls from power, and that a new president takes the White House. The question is, by then, what will be left of the lion?